Hello and welcome. In this tutorial, we are going to make a leaf, and we're going to be using this to kind of show how to use the Polygon pen to make a pretty simple object, how to use a couple of the deformers to manipulate the shape of that object, and then we'll be looking at using a Redshift material and basically being able to get like a backlight to show through the leaf and have a slightly different color or texture. So if you are in the course, you should have access to this leaf image already in the module. If not, you can just search for a leaf that is basically you just want an orthographic top view of a leaf, and it should work basically the same. Okay, so I've got this leaf, and what I've done is, if you haven't done this before, if you go to your top view, side view, or front view, specifically we want the top view for this, you can go down to View in the View menu in your viewport, that's a lot of views, and go to Configure, and then there's this Back tab, and in that you can set the image, and I currently have my transparency set at 91% because it's going to make it a lot easier for you all to see it during the tutorial. And so now what we need to do is we need to go to Points Mode, and we want to use the Polygon pen tool. And there's a couple ways we could go about this. I'm going to more evenly subdivide this once we get started. You can do several different methods with the Polygon pen tool to draw this thing. But the way I'm going to work is I'm going to take my Polygon pen, I'm going to start at the stem, and I'm going to kind of be more or less in the middle of it. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring this up until it's just about where, right, I'm either going to be cutting into or being way off the edge here. So somewhere in here, I'll drop a point. I'm going to come up a little bit further. And really at this point, I could determine like how many polygons do I want. And for me, it's really about figuring out, you know, like it's not going to be that heavy. This is going to be a light object. So I'm going to go ahead and do one there, bring one down here. Now, and then in order to finish this, I can just click one more time and that will finish that polygon. Now, once I've got that one polygon done, I can kind of work a lot faster because there's a mode with the Polygon pen tool where if you hold down Control on your keyboard, and that's with Mac or Windows, I believe, it turns into this bridge tool, and I can just click and drag, and I can pull this out. And then I could hover over this point here, drag it up, hover over this line with Control held down, click and drag to do the next section. And I just want this bottom edge really is what I'm paying attention to align with this, the center line of the leaf. That's just going to make it, oops, and I just did something I did not want to do. That's just going to make it that much more look that much more natural when it goes to move and bend and things like that. So I'm just going to keep doing this on the top half of this leaf. And this leaf is not what's it called? It's not uniform. So we just want to make sure that we're going to do this for both sides. And you're probably kind of getting the process right now already. You just grab this corner, drag it down. You know, ideally, I kind of want these to be more or less vertical. It doesn't, you know, it's not like the end of the world if that doesn't happen. And then, right, I want them to be about the same distance apart from each other. Oh, and I was not paying attention to this bottom edge. That's fine. I'll just pull these up. Pull this one down, make sure that's more or less vertical. This one could probably use to be nudged. What's nice about this is, right, there's nothing is set in stone. We can always just continue to refine this as we go. As I get closer to the end, I am going to make the polygons just a little bit smaller. Just so I have a bit more control there, so that when we get close to the end, if we want this leaf to curl a bit, when we get close here, we can do that. And now that I'm that far, I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm just going to make one final polygon that's pretty narrow. Okay, so now that I've done that, I can go on this bottom edge here, and I can hold down Control, and I can just start dragging these out like this. And you know, I should probably have one more polygon back here. And maybe what I can do is, I mean, maybe I'll just, this will be kind of weird. I have no idea what this is going to look like, if it's going to be a total pain to not have two polygons back on this end that match, but we'll see what goes on. I'm not going to worry about the stem either. We could add that in there if we wanted to, but that could also be a second object, depending on how we have this attached, right? And again, this isn't for something that's our foregrounded object. It's meant to be something that we are using as like kind of an asset either in the background, or maybe it's like on a tree or something and we have just a boatload of these leaves. And so we don't really need to worry too much about them being these like absolutely perfect objects in our scene. And again, just continuing to do this. Note that when I'm moving this, I'm waiting for this end to snap to that point. That ensures that I don't, if I came in here, I'd have basically a gap in this mesh, which is not what I want to do in this case, right? If I was making a model of a different type of leaf that had holes in it, as some plants' leaves do, that maybe it was, say, eaten by caterpillars or something like that, then that might be a case where I would want to put a hole in the leaf. But right now we're just gonna make it whole. Oh, and you saw that did a little bit of a weird thing, but let's just go ahead and say, all right, great. So we've got our mesh kind of dialed in. Now, right, with it set like this, we don't have a whole lot of subdivisions. And so it really depends on, you know, where we want to use this. Do we want it to be more low poly? Do we want to have more control points? If we do want to have more control points, right, if we want these to have more square polygons, what we can do, and we should probably do this anyway just for the good times, but what we can do is we can go ahead and use our line cut tool and click and drag over here to this other edge and make it, you know, we don't want it to taper or anything. We'd like it to be pretty uniform. Hit escape to set that. I'm going to go from this point now, and that's going to be probably right too small. I'm going to undo that. Let's go ahead and just see which one of these is closest. We could probably just throw another piece in here. And then hit escape. And then let's do the same thing on the other side. We'll just go ahead and add a couple more polygons. And I did this on this same one. I'm going to try and keep it somewhat similar. In this case, I am going to use the move tool to select this point and actually just kind of snug this over a little bit. And then the slide tool is really useful here because, right, I don't want to move this edge. I just want to slide these down a little bit so I can make that a little bit more even. And then I'm going to go ahead and go to my knife cut and click and come over here somewhere. That looks pretty straight. And hit escape. And, you know, I could potentially do one more row of polygons here, or I could just move all of these edges out a little bit further, but I'm going to leave it the way it is for now. Let's go ahead and save this, so in case something crashes here in a little bit, we are good to go. So I'm just going to call this leaf toot. Okay, so I've got my leaf geometry done. So now what I need to do is I need to start bending it and manipulating it, or I could texture it first. But I'm going to go ahead and bend it first. We'll do the modeling, and then we will do the texturing. So I'm going to go ahead and switch my view to perspective. And once I've got my perspective view set up, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to start by using just a bend deformer and see what we get out of that. So I'm going to select my bend deformer. I'm going to make the bend a child of the polygon object. And then I'm going to increase the strength some. And you're going to see it's not really working the way I would like it to. So let's go ahead and change orientations and see if we get any different setting, right? And none of that seems to be working, right? If I change this orientation here, I'm not really getting anything either. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to select my bend deformer. I'm going to use the rotate tool. And just as a note, I have this set in Z+. You'll see that, and what's odd is this rotation is going to suddenly start to make this bend. I'm not quite sure why with a flat polygon object it does not bend unless you rotate the bend tool, but that is the case. If I rotate it in the other direction, right, I can actually get some twisting and some stretching and weirdness. I want you to note that right now this is set to limited. I can't change this to unlimited, and then when I rotate it, it's going to be a bit smoother. You won't have those, I don't know if you noticed it or maybe in yours you noticed, but there was like there were like hard limits to where it would bend to, right? If I said limited and I do this again, you can kind of see it presses flat after a while, and you can see like it's almost like this, the edge over there is glued to like a tabletop or something. But at this point I just really want to rotate it in the blue direction, right? And you can see depending on how I rotate this, I have a fair amount of control over, you know, how much curve there is to this. One thing to note is that if we disconnect this, right, this is actually stretching and deforming this leaf. It's making it longer than it was before. If you check mark this keep length option down here on the bend, that will actually keep it so that it so that you don't have quite so much severe bending, right? And so this is one way to do this. We can set this to unlimited again, so right, we can really curl it up if we want. And then the strength here, right, again, I can curl this so that it's you know, puncturing through itself, right? So there's a lot of potential for curl on this setting, right? I think one of the most frustrating things with the bend deformer is that it does sometimes you know, it looks like it's just going to fold this thing over, but you just need to do some rotation. I use Z plus because of the way that I drew this. If I change this to Y plus and was to attempt to do any rotation, oh, it's actually working the same way. Never mind. Maybe it's if I twist it this way. There was, earlier I was working on this and it totally blew up into, like it went crazy. So another, like if you want a little bit of motion in another direction, you can also use the angle to just apply a little bit more curvature to it, right? Okay. So I've got this one, that one set. And I just want you to note when I go back to my polygon, if I'm not in model mode, or even if I say, if I'm not in model mode, if I'm in one of these modes, it will flatten that image out, but that's fine. So right now what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and copy this and paste it, and I'm going to get rid of the bend deformer on one of these. It doesn't matter which one, because I want to show you another method really quick of another tool that gives you a bit more freedom in terms of how this object is aligned. So first I'm going to go ahead and turn the visibility of this second leaf off so I don't have to look at that while I'm doing this. And then I'm going to go ahead and use the spline rail deformer. And the spline rail is a little bit more complex. You can see there's all these different splines that we can use to control the shape of this thing. And so I'm going to go ahead and go to my right view. And is that the Z? I think that's the right way. We'll see. We can always change things. And I'm going to use the spline pen tool. And I'm just going to go ahead and make a little bit of a curve here that kind of goes like this. And then I'm going to hit escape. And I'm going to go back to my spline rail. I'm going to make it a child of my polygon. And remember, deformers are always children. I don't know why they chose to do that with this one system, but they did. So I'm going to go ahead and take this spline, and I'm going to go ahead and drop it in my Z spline left. And you'll see that my mesh has like really deformed pretty substantially at this point, right? It's it's a pretty big disaster, but that's fine. What I want to do is I want to select that spline that I've created. I want to copy it, I want to paste it, and then I want to go back to my spline rail, and I want to make it the right side. And you'll see that nothing has changed. But now if I was to take one of these splines, like spline.1, and I was going to go to model mode and use the move tool, then what I can do is I can pull this out, and you can kind of see that it depends on which direction I orient it, but it's really deformed, and you'll notice that the deformation is kind of in the wrong direction, right? We don't want this to be aimed this way, the way it is currently aimed, where it's like collapsing the leaf lengthwise. We'd like these curves to be in the other direction. So let's take our two splines, and we are going to rotate those. We want to actually rotate the deformer, not the splines. I apologize for that. I had forgotten what I had done previously. And so now we've got this leaf. You can see it's kind of being stretched and warped in a really strange way. And so part of that, you can see if I click on some of these, is really, it's not the unlimited here. It's not really any of these settings. What's going on is that these splines have adaptive points, right? So if I was to change this to uniform and maybe increase the number of points here, I might get a better result. If I do not get a better result with this, right, then maybe what I need to do is either adjust my splines, which is totally possible. Let's go ahead and come in here, and I can select some of these and use the move tool. And let's just see what happens if I stretch this out a little bit. That seems to be making the leaf a lot happier. One of the other things that is going to make this leaf better, and I want you to note that, right, as I'm moving each of these points, right, I'm actually being able to twist and turn the leaf, and I have a fair amount of control over the shape of this leaf. Now, it's not perfect at this point, and you can kind of see, right, there's like kind of a limit on where I'm able to adjust. And so if we take our spline rail and we actually scale this object up, you can see that as I scale this object up, my leaf is going to be decreasing in scale and kind of meshing and matching more closely to those splines. But then it also means that I probably need to use model mode and actually move these splines around a little bit, right, to get the scale back to where I'd want. You know, it's also kind of funny, right? It's rotated at 90 degrees, but that's totally fine, right? But you can see that, right, I have a fair amount of control over like making this leaf more of a ripple shape. And yeah, now if I want it to be smoother than this, one of the easiest ways to do that is just to add a subdivision surface to my polygon object, and then I will get a much smoother looking rounded leaf shape. Okay, so these are two tools that that allow us to pretty easily and quickly manipulate the shape of objects. There's other experiments you can do. You could add additional splines in some of the other fields and look at the manual to see what that change is. You can also, right, if I start to rotate this spline a little bit, you can see that that's going to warp things as well in a different way. And it's, you know, sometimes it doesn't do exactly what you think it's going to do, because as you rotate the spline, really strange behavior can happen in that mesh that's kind of glued to it. But that is another, it's another option you have for, right, for, you know, tweaking and adjusting this leaf to make it unique. If you're using this one leaf and you want to have many different ones that look a little bit different, this is a way to do it. Okay, so we've got two leaves. We can turn this one back on temporarily, and they're intersecting right now, but that's fine. And I'm going to go ahead and hide the one that's in the subdivision surface. And I just want to have this other one open right now, and then I'm going to turn the bend off. right? Because what I want to do at this point is I want to apply a material, and I want to get this material set on my object. So we've done the modeling part. Let's save it, and then we can go ahead and do the next section. Okay, so let's go ahead and create our leaf material. And again, right, we should be using the Redshift renderer. If you aren't sure, just check on your render settings here and double check that that renderer is set correctly. We're going to create a new just basic material by hitting the plus sign. Let's go ahead and apply it to our leaf. Double click, and then we are going to create a texture node so we can load an image or texture in, and we're going to make this the color channel. Now that we've made this the color channel, let's go ahead and load our image. And let's see here, I believe I have it in downloads. I may have it somewhere else at this point, but we're just going to go to downloads and look for the leaf. There it is, beautiful. And yes. Okay, so now I've got this leaf applied to my leaf. However, you can see that that leaf doesn't look so hot, right? And so what's happening? The biggest issue right now is that we don't have any UVs, right? You can, if you look at this polygon object, this has absolutely no UVs, right? Because we built this from scratch, UVs were not part of the process. So let's go ahead and go to our UV edit mode real quick. And once we're in UV edit mode, we can go ahead and click on the gear and make sure that we have our projection type, and let's just set this to frontal for the time being. We're going to hit OK. All right, and so now our leaf is there. We should be able to go to our polygon mode, double click, select this island, and we should be able to just say UV unwrap. And I believe in its current state, it's just going to make it bigger and make it fill the image, right? And so now, now that we've got that set, we're in a reasonably good state, right? We've got our UVs, but right, the texture still doesn't look right. Now, one of the other issues is, right, if I go to textures, and you'll see I don't actually have it available here yet. I'd have to load it in a special way, but we're not going to do that right now. But I know it's not going to align with the leaf in my image currently. So the next step is that I need to select this material, and you'll see that my projection is currently set to spherical, and that's what it does by default if there are no UVs on an object. And so I need to change this to if I do UVW mapping. Right, now you can see that the leaf is about the right size, it's just it's just off. And so I could do a couple things here. One, I can go up to this file and I can say open texture, and I can find this leaf wherever it may have landed when it got brought in. I don't see it over here. So I'm going to go back to my downloads folder and type in L and find my leaf and open this up, right? And so now I have this document here where I can go in and I can start to adjust the UVs in order for this to match my texture, right? So this is one way that I could make an adjustment. And what I'd like to do is go to edges mode. I want to make sure I have my polygon selected so I can see what's going on. I want to come down to textures, and now I can add this here. And then what I want to do is I want to rotate my UVs. I already have the rotate tool selected, so I'm going to click and drag until this is a little bit closer to here. I'm going to use my move tool. I'm going to scoot this over just a little bit. I'm going to rotate a little bit more. And I'm going to use my move tool. And what I want to do is I want to do packing. I want to preserve my orientation. I don't know if equalize island size needs to be check marked, but let's go ahead and hit apply and see if that gets us a little bit closer. Okay, so you can see it's a little closer, but things are still a little bit warped. We're going to click and we're going to drag a little bit to make this a little bit smaller. Use the move tool. And then there's a couple tools here I can use to kind of push and pull this until it's where I want it to be. The magnet tool is one of them. Now, you can see all I'm doing is I'm just going ahead and clicking on this mesh, and I'm pulling this up until it covers the edges of those leaves. And I'm just going to go ahead and go down and just do the same thing, right? It's a pretty effective tool for doing slight manipulation, and you'll notice in my viewport as I'm doing this, right, changes are happening, changes are afoot in that viewport, and I'm starting to get the actual leaf applied exactly where I want it to be on this material. Isn't that like kind of insanely handy? Okay, I'm going to zoom in a little bit because I can see I actually need to pull this out just a touch. And then this is actually needs to go out a touch too. And I'm intentionally leaving like a little bit of an edge here. And we're going to do a couple steps in order to basically hide everything except the leaf texture in just a little bit. Okay. So I've got this set. Let's go ahead and save it just in case something horrible happens. And I'm going to go to my standard view. I'm going to check the time because I have to teach in a little bit. And now let's go ahead and turn our bend deformer back on and make sure if nothing happens, that means we are still in Polygon mode, so we can switch here. And so now we do have this texture applied to our leaf. And what's nice is, right, the way projection works, it's going to show through both sides because this is just one solid polygon. We're at a pretty good stopping place right now. What we're going to do next is we'll add additional materials or additional material parameters and nodes and things like that in order to continue to tweak this, get rid of this white edge, add some bump to it and some texture, and then also go ahead and backlight it. All right.